one of the worst things I'm going through right now is when Pam's not home, it's just me and little Coco. And I pick something up and I drop it on the floor. It stays there until Pam gets home. And that's just food. Coco takes care of it. But you know, I mentioned something to Pam, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. Well, I laid up in bed and I really didn't do much of anything. I was getting a lot of cards from church members, which I just absolutely loved. And she's lining them up in front of the window, you know, where I could see them. Then I was looking at them one day, and there's about, I don't know, 10 or 11 cards up there, and they had pictures of puppies on the front. I thought either they think I'm a cute little puppy, or they're trying to tell me something else I wasn't really sure. But it's good to be back. It was really great to be back up here last Sunday. It's good to be here today. You know, I'm trying to figure out how my sermon blew up the computer, because all I gave was a title to it. So if just a title can blow up the computer, this must be going to be a powerful sermon. Amen. But you know, Independence Day, I just love it. You know, I served in the military. My dad did, my grandfather did, my great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather, my boys served in the military. But there's one thing about the 4th of July that just drives me nuts. And I miss it every time I go to the store to buy hot dogs and bun for the 4th of July. Who was the fella that decided to put 10 hot dogs in a package, only 8 buns in a package? I figured out to make it work, you had to spend like $50 to make the numbers work out. So you have the same amount. Well, not the way I buy it. Pam gets upset with me because I buy the RS hot dogs. You know, they're 89 cents a package, depending on where you get them. Or she likes to get the all beef for like $3. I can buy 3 or 4 packages for her one. But today, of course, the title of the sermon is, of course, it's a tough one. I spent hours trying to think of it, and it's Independence Day. So, you know, the scripture I'm going to be using is Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. Before I get to that, I want to read a little something that I found yesterday. It was written by a Frenchman, but in the early 1830s, he came to America. His first name was Alexis, and I'm not even going to try to tell you his last name, because I wouldn't even come close to getting it right. But he came to America to examine America's civil institutions. His study spelled out, is actually written into a book called Democracy in America. And in it he wrote, I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. In her fertile fields and boundless prairies, and it was not there. In her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpit aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. And if America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. Now, he wrote his book in 1835. And one of the things he wrote in there is there is no country in the world where the Christian religion retains a greater influence over the souls of men than in America. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verses 7 through 9, God tells us, for what great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon Him? And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are all this law which I have set before you this day? I'm going to read that again, okay? I skipped about 2 verses there, didn't I? Let me try it again. That's the medication kicking in. For what great nation is there that has God so near it, and as the Lord our God, as is to which whatever reason we may call upon Him? And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all the laws that I set before you. Only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And this is important right here. And teach them to your children and to your grandchildren. The first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court was a man named John Jay. In fact, he's called the father of the Supreme Court. He's also one of the primary writers of the Constitution, but he wrote this one time. It is truly of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians as their rulers. You know, the original 13 colonies, the majority of them have had a law. And that law required that anybody being elected to office, before they could take that office, had to take an oath affirming their Christian faith before they could even take that office. Could you imagine if we did that now? Could you imagine if we made the men and women that were elected to a position in our country now, if we made them take an oath of their Christian faith? You know, not only did Congress, but no, Congress in 1782 approved the use of the Bibles in schools. In fact, when you look at the history of America, you go back to the mid-1700s, there was a lot of schools that the only book that they had was the Holy Bible. But Congress, well, they approved the use. Not only did they approve the use of the Bible in the schools, but Congress paid for the Bibles with tax money. And in 1844, when someone sued to remove the Bibles from the school, the Supreme Court ruled, why should not the Bible, and especially the New Testament, be read and taught as divine revelations in the schools? Where can the purest principles of morality be learned so clearly or so perfectly as from the New Testament? Can you imagine hearing those words from our Supreme Court now? You know, these people back then, they were so instrumental in establishing our nation. Would it be neat if they shared? Well, I don't know if it'd be neat or not. If they were here today to see the status of our country and what they would think about the radicals that are out there in our country today. You know, we've gone a long ways away from our roots as Americans. So one of my goals this morning is maybe to help educate us on and tell us and help us to understand what these men were like that formed our nation, our forefathers. You know, our schools, systems, our colleges, and our universities. At the beginning of our country, the first ones that were formed, you know, you look at Yale, Harvard, Cornell, and I could go on and on, with the first colleges in our country. These are colleges that we look at now as bastions of liberalism. But each and every one of them was founded as a Christian college. That's where the pastors of that day were trained, were in these Ivy League schools. But they've taken a huge step away from what they were founded for. They've now become pastors of liberalism, teaching anything but God. You know, you go and enroll in these schools, down these universities, and you know, it's a big thing in California now that on the enrollment forms, it used to be you had to check male or female. Now there's several different things you can check on there. Male, female, transgender, you know, it goes on, and it has no sex at all. That's the kind of things that's being pushed upon us by our liberal universities right now. That's what's sad, is people would not, this world would not realize that our big universities back east that are in our original 13 colonies, people would not know that these colleges were founded by Christians if it wasn't for Christians to tell them about it now. They would have no idea. First thing I want to look at is America was settled by people looking for religious freedom. They were looking for a place where they could exercise their right to worship freely, not their right to be exempted from religion. You know, that's the biggest movement we see in America now, isn't it? One of the things we read in the paper, or online, we see in the news, are these organizations that want to take everything Christian away as in public view. The earliest settlers were people that came here primarily looking for religious freedom. Other nations, for the most part, came into existence through conquest, or selfishness, or ambition. But America came into existence because people were looking for a place where they could worship God freely. The ones who settled on Mayflower in 1620, they fled from tyranny and oppression. And they wrote up what's called the Mayflower Compact, which was signed on the Mayflower on their way to this new land. And they proclaimed that they had come to the new world for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. In those early colonies, when they would start cutting down trees and erecting buildings, the first building that they would erect would be a church. That would be the first public building that they would erect. Before they even started building houses or warehouses, they built the church. That way they could exercise their right to worship God. When things didn't go right for them, the first thing they would do is gather at the church and they would pray to God for help. When things went great, when the harvests were bountiful, the first thing they would do is they would gather at the church and give thanks to God. In 1643, as more and more people arrived on these shores, they joined together to form what's called the New England Confederation. And they wrote our first Constitution. And it had these words in it: whereas we all came into these parts with one and the same end and aim, namely to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel and purity and peace. People of the world don't want you hearing that now, do they? You mention our forefathers, the first thing they do is they do everything they can to find something bad about them. Were our forefathers perfect? No, they weren't. Far from it. There is no Christian that's perfect. But these men came here with their families so they could worship God freely. And they did it so they could do it without persecution. The next thing about America is that the founders of our nation had a strong desire to be pleasing to God and to do His will. You know, from the time that the first people showed up on our shores, and we look from there and go forward 150 years, things didn't go quite the way the first ones thought it would go when they landed on these shores. The next generations stepped away from God. They stepped away from worship. They stepped away from thanking God for things. They stepped away from going to God for help. And they were more interested in increasing their wealth and creating a comfortable lifestyle than being faithful to God and His Word. And as more and more immigrants came to our country, many of them came for other reasons, with entirely different motives than what the original ones came here for. An example, whether out of concern for them or just to get rid of those considered undesirable, England began a program of emptying its prisons and by making it possible for prisoners to come to this new world as indentured servants. At the same time, the King of England granted vast tracts of land in the New World to his special friends. And that's how slavery came into our nation, was through that. Because they needed to work these large plantations that belonged to these friends of the king. The spiritual atmosphere in our country at that time went downhill, and it went downhill rapidly. Churches were dying. And many of them that had once sought religious freedom for themselves were now being intolerant of others. Does that sound like a lot like it is today? The people of this world are becoming so intolerant of each other. The ones that claim tolerance are the ones that are the most intolerant. And it was during this time that some of them went off in these really strange directions when it comes to spirituality. And we're seeing the same thing today. To give you an example of what happened back then. In 1692, a slave girl was brought by her masters to live in Salem, Massachusetts. She began to tell young girls these wild stories about the power of voodoo. And it wasn't long until fear filled that community. And then we had the Salem witch trials. The end result of all this going on in our new world back then was that by 1730, only about 10% of the people in the colonies were attending church. That which had begun for the glory of God and for the advancement of the Christian faith had almost disappeared from our country before we even became a real nation. But that's the part of history that people like to throw up at us. At that time, when we were not a Christian nation, or we were not Christians here in this world, or only 10% were attending church. But then something amazing happened. Starting in 1734, a handful of pastors like Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, Gilbert Tennant, and others, they began to preach in churches in the streets throughout the colonies. And these soon turned into these great crusades. You know, when I think about it, I think about these big crusades that Billy Graham would have, where there'd be tens of thousands of people there. And there'd be hundreds, if not thousands of people accepting Christ as their Savior. These men, they started these great crusades and revivals that spread throughout the 13 colonies. So many people came to Christ in that era that was called the Great Awakening. Tens of thousands of people dedicated their lives to Christ and were baptized. So many people came to hear Whitefield as he traveled to college that he had to hold open air meetings because he could not find a building big enough to hold the people that wanted to hear him. Benjamin Franklin wrote this: "It was wonderful to see the change soon made in the manners of our inhabitants, from being thoughtless or indifferent about religion. It seemed as if all the world was growing religious, so that one could not walk through the town in an evening without hearing psalms sung in different families of every street. We had a great awakening. We need another one again. There's been more than one great awakening in our nation's history. There's another one that they said happened around the 1820s. There's been 2 or 3 since. The last great awakening that, if you look at your history books or look at your religious writings that they talk about, happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s. But our nation is in need of a great awakening now. But we look back at that time. That great awakening was the precursor to the American Revolution. Our founding fathers, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, those who wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and those who put their lives on the line and who fought and died that we might be free. All these grew up and came into leadership during the Great Awakening. The generation that was around during that Great Awakening became the leaders of the American Revolution. This is a prayer that is found in the diary of George Washington, and it was in his own handwriting, and his prayer went like this. Let my heart be gracious, God. Be so affected with your glory and majesty that I may discharge those weighty duties which thou requirest of me. Again, I have called on thee for pardon and forgiveness of sins, for the sacrifice of Jesus Christ offered on the cross for me. Thou gavest thy Son to die for me, hast given me assurance of my salvation. That was a prayer by George Washington. You know, you hear people talk about George Washington today, they don't have much good to say about him. But one thing we do know about him, he was a devout Christian. Was he perfect? No, he wasn't perfect. But he loved God. He trusted Christ as his Savior. You know, he was not alone in his faith. Over a 10-year period, the University of Houston collected 15,000 writings that were done by our founding fathers. And the reason they did this was their goal was to find the primary source of ideas behind the Constitution. By identifying the sources of quotes most often used by the founding fathers. And guess what the primary source was? The Bible. 94% of the quotes of the founders of our nation were based upon the Bible. So the point of all of this is that the cultural environment on the eve of the American Revolution was undeniably spiritual. And this focus dramatically affected the men and women who gave birth to this great nation that we have today. America was founded by men and women who acknowledged God's supreme rule. They acknowledged His supreme rule over man and nations. They were not perfect, just as we're not. Now, they weren't all devout Christians, but they all acknowledged that God was the supreme ruler. Most of you are familiar with the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, but I want to read it to you. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. We see there how in the very beginning of our Declaration of Independence, where it says that we are endowed by our Creator. How can people say we are not a Christian nation when right there in the beginning of our Declaration of Independence it talks about our Creator? Isaiah 5:20 says, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. That's what we're seeing now in this nation with the liberal movement that's out there right now. They're calling what's good, they're calling darkness, and what is darkness they are calling good. Anything that shows Christianity they want removed from the public space. There's another story about George Washington. Nobody really knows who wrote this. But he wrote that I was riding with Mr. Potts near the Valley Forge, where the army lay during the War of the Revolution. When Mr. Potts said, do you see that woods and that plain? There lay the army of Washington. It was most distressing. It was a most distressing time of the year. And all were giving up the ship, except that great good man. In that woods, I heard a plaintive sound of a man of prayer. I tied my horse to a sapling and went quietly into the woods. To my astonishment, I saw the great George Washington on his knees alone, with a sword on one side and his hat on the other. He was at prayer to the God of the armies, beseeching to interpose with his divine aid, as it was the crisis and cause of the country, of humanity, and of the world. Such a prayer I never heard from the lips of man. I left him alone praying. I went home and told my wife. We never thought a man could be a soldier and a Christian. But if there was one in the world, it was Washington. You know, it was also George Washington that on October 3rd, 1789, proclaimed the first National Day of Prayer. People back then were saying that they wanted to form a government whose job it was to protect what their Creator has given to each of us. You know, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, you read the beginning of Independence Day, they went into the charges that they had against the King of England. But then they made two more references to God later on. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge," that's God, "and of the world." So they're saying God is the Supreme Judge, and He's also the Supreme Judge of the world. And then they go on and say, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence." And once again, that's talking about God. "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." You know, the 52 men that signed the Declaration of Independence, a good many of them died broke, bankrupt, lost their families, lost everything they had, lost their lives after signing the Declaration of Independence. John Adams wrote in a letter to his wife Abigail about the meeting of the First Continental Congress. He said, "The most amazing thing occurred. Even the stern old Quakers had tears gushing from their cheeks." That's because somebody during that Continental Congress said, "Let's stop and pray." And they all got on their knees and prayed. At the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Samuel Adams, often called the father of the Revolution, declared, "We have this day restored the sovereign, to whom all men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and from the rising to the setting of the sun, let His kingdom come." America was founded by men and women that acknowledged who God was, that He is the supreme ruler over men and nations. You know, we have in our government three things. We have the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and we have the administrative branch. Where do we get that from? We get it from the Bible. Isaiah 33:22 says this, "For the Lord is our judge, our lawgiver, and our king is He who saves us." That's where we get our three branches of government. Let me read again. "For the Lord is judge." That's our judicial branch. Our lawgiver. Well, our legislative branch, our job is to create laws. And then our king, which is our executive branch. But then it goes on to say, it is He who will save us. It is God who will save us. American law was written by our founding fathers to guarantee our religious freedom and the freedom to worship God the way that we want to. You know, I got to thinking today before I came here to the church this morning. Let's look at where our country is now. Will our kids and grandkids and our great-grandkids, will they have the freedom that we have right now? Or will it be even worse for them? Well, who can make that decision? We can. It is our responsibility to guarantee the freedoms to our children that we've enjoyed, and to our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. It is up to us to guarantee that freedom. Just as our forefathers guaranteed the freedom to us, and every man and woman has died and shed their blood throughout our history to guarantee that we have the freedoms that we have. It is now our time to step up and guarantee these freedoms for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But it begins with this: understanding who our Savior is. And our Savior is Jesus Christ. You know, we think about what we need to sacrifice in order for our kids to have the freedoms that we have. The sacrifice that we have to make is nothing compared to the sacrifice that Jesus made to us, for us 2,000 years ago. He hung on the cross. Before he even got there, he was beaten. He was mocked. His beard was torn out. And then he died on that cross a horrible death so that we would have salvation. Please join me this morning. Please stand as we have our invitation. With heads bowed and eyes closed.